In cities like this, power did not announce itself. It did not always arrive with sirens, bodyguards, or headlines. Sometimes power sat in the corner booth of an old restaurant with dim amber lights and white linen tablecloths, speaking softly enough that everyone leaned in and feared missing a word. And sometimes the most dangerous person in the room was the one carrying a tray. Her name was Alina Varela. Most people at La Nazi Pharaoh knew her only as the quiet waitress with the dark eyes. The one who never flirted for tips, never complained, never lingered where men with expensive watches and bloodless smiles were discussing things ordinary people should never hear. She worked 5 nights a week, sometimes 6 when the rent was due, and every shift ended the same way: aching feet, cold fingers, and the smell of expensive whiskey trapped in her hair. By midnight, she was usually too tired to think. By 2 in the morning, she was too disciplined to let herself break. She lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a shuttered tailor shop in the old quarter, where the pipe screamed in winter and the ceiling leaked in spring. The rent had gone up twice in 1 year. Her younger brother, Matteo, needed medication she could barely afford. Her mother had died 3 years ago with hospital bills Alina was still paying off in neat monthly installments she never missed. And yet, for all the pressure pressing on her ribs day after day, she remained impossibly composed. Too composed, some people said. Like she had practiced suffering until it looked like grace. At work, the kitchen staff called her La Sombra, the shadow. Not because she was timid. Because she moved like she belonged to the architecture. Silent. Precise. Unforgettable only after she was gone. No one there knew that Alina spoke 5 languages fluently. That she had once studied international commercial law before her mother got sick and tuition became impossible. That she could read a forged shipping manifest faster than most customs officers. That she remembered details the way some people remembered songs. No one knew because Alina had learned a brutal truth very young. A woman survives dangerous men more easily when they mistake restraint for helplessness. And men always did. Especially powerful ones. Especially men like Dante Morti. The first time Alina saw him in person, the entire restaurant shifted around his arrival like metal bending toward a magnet. He did not enter loudly. He never had to. His men came first: tailored suits, coiled earpieces, the cold alertness of people who had killed before and would again. Then the maitre d' straightened. Then the owner personally stepped out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel he had no business holding himself. Then Dante Morti walked in. He was taller than the stories suggested, though it was never his height people remembered. It was the stillness. The terrifying stillness. A stillness so complete it made everyone else look nervous by comparison. He wore a charcoal overcoat over a black suit with no tie, as if formality itself should feel grateful he tolerated it. His hair was combed back carelessly, a thin scar cut near one brow. His face was severe in the way old marble statues were severe, beautiful only if you ignored the threat in it. This was the man newspapers called a businessman. This was the man prosecutors could never touch. This was the man half the underworld feared and the other half obeyed. Don Dante Morti. He owned ports, logistics companies, private security firms, real estate, and enough politicians to make the city feel leased rather than governed. Officially, he had no criminal record. Unofficially, there were graves with his fingerprints all over them. Alina had served dangerous men before: cartel intermediaries, judges with appetites, men who laughed too hard at cruelty and tipped too generously afterward. But Dante Morti was different. He did not perform power. He contained it. That made him worse. And somehow quieter. The first night he noticed Alina, she almost wished he hadn't. Red or white? She asked, setting down the leather-bound wine list without looking directly at him longer than necessary. Dante's gaze lifted. His eyes were dark and unreadable. Which one doesn't lie? He asked. A few men at the table chuckled immediately, eager in the way lesser men often were around a king. Alina did not smile. The betrayal, she said calmly. The Bordeaux pretends to be older than it is. It does. One of Dante's lieutenants snorted. But Dante kept looking at her. Then, slowly, one corner of his mouth moved. Betrayal, then. She nodded once and walked away. No one said anything for the rest of that exchange, but she felt it anyway, the tiny shift in attention. The room's instinctive recognition that something had happened, though they could not have named what. That was the problem with people like Dante. They were used to surfaces. Used to fear. Used to charm. Used to greed. They noticed immediately when someone offered them none of the above. Still, that should have been the end of it. A waitress serving wine. A don having dinner. Two worlds brushing shoulders and moving on. But cities built on corruption are never that simple. And power never stays seated for long. 3 weeks later, on a rain-slick Thursday, Elena was carrying a tray of glasses toward the private room upstairs when she heard shouting behind the frosted doors. Not normal restaurant shouting. Not drunken boasting or political laughter or men negotiating over cigars and ego. This was sharp. Panic sharp. She slowed without meaning to. Inside, voices overlapped in Italian and English. Swear to God, he collapsed. Call a doctor. Don't let anyone leave. Then came the sound of a chair crashing backward. Elena pushed the door open with her shoulder before anyone could stop her. The room froze. It was Dante's table. But this was no dinner anymore. One of the older men, a silver-haired accountant she had seen there twice before, was slumped sideways in his chair, lips pale, one hand clawed around his throat. A glass of red wine had spilled across the white tablecloth like a wound. 2 bodyguards stood uselessly nearby. Another man was fumbling with his phone. And Dante Morty was already on his feet. Not panicked. Was focused. Every eye turned to Elena the second she entered. Wrong place. Wrong moment. Wrong woman to witness the wrong thing. Get out, one of the men snapped. Elena did not move. She looked once at the man convulsing. Then at the untouched appetizer plate. Then at the wine. Then at the bluish tinge gathering beneath the victim's fingernails. And something old and buried inside her sharpened instantly. He's not choking, she said. Silence. Dante turned fully toward her. What did you say? Elena set the tray down. He's not choking, she repeated, already moving toward the man. And if you force water into him, you'll make it worse. One of the guards stepped forward. Don't touch him. But Dante lifted a hand. Just slightly. That was all it took. The guard stopped. The room obeyed. Elena crouched beside the collapsing man, checked his pupils, pulse, and breathing with quick, practiced movements. Her face remained calm, but inside her mind was moving at speed. This was not random. Not alcohol poisoning. Not a heart attack. Not simple anaphylaxis. Too fast. Too specific. Too clean. She looked at the wineglass again. Then at the older man's cufflinks. Then at the shellfish plate near his right hand. Then she stood. He needs an ambulance, someone barked. No, Elena said immediately. He needs activated charcoal, oxygen, and a doctor who won't ask the wrong questions before he loses respiratory control. Now even the men who had dismissed her were staring. Dante took one slow step toward her. How, he asked, voice low enough to chill the room, would a waitress know that? A stupid man would have said too much. A frightened one would have said nothing. Elena did neither. My mother was a toxicology nurse, she said, and if you waste another 2 minutes arguing, he dies. That was not the full truth. But it was true enough. Dante's gaze stayed on her for one long second. Then he turned to his men. Do exactly what she said. No one argued. That was the first crack. Snarl. Almost invisible. But failed to the illusion that power always recognized itself. Because for the first time in a room full of armed men and inherited violence, Dante Morty had listened to a waitress. And everyone had seen it. The next 20 minutes moved with brutal efficiency. A private physician arrived instead of an ambulance. The victim, Riccardo Bellini, Dante's financial controller, was stabilized enough to survive transport. The shellfish was bagged. The wine was confiscated. Phones were collected. Doors were locked. No one left. And Elena, who had only intended to prevent a man from dying, suddenly found herself standing at the center of something much larger than a poisoning. Something organized. Something eternal. Someone in that room had tried to kill a man under Dante Morty's protection. That kind of mistake did not remain private for long. When the doctor finally confirmed that Bellini had likely ingested a fast-acting neurotoxic compound in trace quantity, the room changed temperature. Not figuratively. Actually. Fear has a climate. And now it was winter. Dante stood near the window with one hand in his pocket, listening as the physician explained the likely timing of exposure. 10 to 15 minutes before symptoms, the doctor said. Maybe less. So it happened here, one lieutenant muttered. No, Alina said quietly. Every head turned. She wished, for one foolish second, that she had stayed silent. But once truth enters a room, it rarely leaves politely. She pointed to the victim's untouched food. If it happened here, the shellfish would matter more, but his fingers smelled faintly bitter when I checked his pulse. Almond adjacent, though not cyanide exactly. The residues likely from direct transfer, glass rim, napkin edge, or hand contact before he sat down. The room stared at her. Not because she was loud. Because she was precise. And precision is terrifying when it arrives from the wrong person. Dante's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not softer. Not warmer. Shorter. Explain, he said. Alina swallowed. Then she did the thing that would alter the course of her life. She walked to the table where some of the most dangerous men in the city were standing and began pointing out what they had all missed. This place setting was adjusted after service started, she said. The napkin fold is wrong for the restaurant standard. The water glass was replaced, and his wine was poured second, not first, despite seating order. One of the men frowned. How would you know that? Because I served the table. She lifted the Bellini man's napkin with 2 fingers. There's a faint residue line here, not food, powder dissolved by condensation or skin oils. A long silence followed. Then Dante asked, who touched the table? And now his voice was different. Not dismissive. Not skeptical. Deve. One by one, the staff and security were called in. One by one, they answered. And lived the first. She should have been afraid. And she was. But fear was familiar. What unsettled her more was Dante himself. Because when most powerful men are corrected by women beneath them socially, they punish the interruption. Dante did not. He watched. He listened. And worst of all, he believed her. Not fully. Not yet. But enough. Enough to change the direction of the night. Enough to become dangerous. An hour later, after statements were taken and the restaurant was unofficially closed, Alina was escorted not roughly, but unmistakably into Dante's private office on the 3rd floor. The room was elegant in the cold way wealth often is. Dark wood. Old books. A decanter no one had touched. A city skyline behind rain-streaked glass. Dante stood by the desk while she remained near the door. 2 of his men stayed outside. He had dismissed everyone else. That, somehow, was worse. You can sit, he said. I'm fine. His eyes flicked once to her shoes. Her feet had to be killing her. But he didn't say it. Instead, he moved around the desk and leaned one hand against the polished edge. Who are you? It was not flirtation. Not curiosity. Interrogation disguised as conversation. Alina met his gaze evenly. A waitress. No, he said, that's what you do, not who you are. She said nothing. The rain tapped against the glass. Below them, the city carried on unaware that lives had just been redrawn 3 floors above. Dante studied her face for a long moment. Then he said, you knew what was happening before my men did. They aren't trained for poisoning. They're trained to notice threats. Most men only notice threats that look like men. That landed. She saw it. A tiny stillness. A microscopic pause. Then, to her surprise, Dante almost smiled. Is that what you think of us? I think, Alina said carefully, that power makes people lazy in very specific ways. Another pause. And there was again that unsettling shift in him. Recognition. Not of her identity. Not yet. What of her mind? That was far more dangerous. You should be careful, Dante said quietly. She frowned. Is that a threat? No. He held her gaze. It's the opposite. For the first time that night, Alina felt something colder than fear. Because she understood, with sudden clarity, what had just happened. She had not simply interrupted a crime. She had made herself visible. And in worlds built on hierarchy, visibility is expensive. You can't keep me here, she said. I know. Then why am I here? Dante was silent for a moment. When he answered, his voice had lowered again. Because someone poisoned a man at my table, he said, and the only person in the room who saw it clearly was the woman everyone assumed did not matter. He straightened. Then added, almost to himself, that interests me. Elena should have left immediately. Should have thanked him for the shift pay and never come back. Should have disappeared into the safe anonymity of ordinary struggle. But life rarely offers women like her clean exits. Only complicated thresholds. And she had already crossed this one. She didn't know it yet. But by the end of the week, she would be pulled into a war inside Dante Morti's empire. A war built not just on violence, but on documents. On loyalty. On inheritance. On a child whose life was already being negotiated by men too proud to call it what it was. And before it was over, the city would remember a name it had buried years ago. Not Elena Varla. Not the waitress. Not the shadow. But the name whispered in old ports, sealed courtrooms, offshore ledgers, and among men who vanished after underestimating the wrong woman. The name even monsters feared. And Dante Morti had just insulted her in public without realizing who she was. There are moments in life when danger does not arrive like a gunshot. It arrives like a decision. A quiet one. A simple one. The kind that can still be undone for exactly 3 seconds and then never again. Elena Varla stood beneath the restaurant awning after closing, the rain now reduced to a fine silver mist drifting through the streetlights, and stared at the black sedan idling at the curb. She already knew it was for her. She also knew that getting into it would be a mistake. The kind of mistake women like her were never allowed to recover from. She had gone upstairs to save a life. She had spoken because silence would have made her complicit. That should have been the end of it. Instead, she had become useful. And usefulness, in a world run by men like Dante Morti, was more dangerous than hatred. One of his security men opened the rear door without speaking. We're not kidnapping you, he said, in the dry tone of someone who understood exactly how much this looked like a kidnapping. That's a comforting sentence, Elena replied. He didn't smile. Mr. Morty asked that you come. Asked. Men with guns always use the most polite words. We looked at the vacancy and to the rhythm to the vernon of the sleep the nice. She could still say no. She should say no. But then she remembered Bellina's lips turning blue. The residue on the napkin. The tiny, incorrect shift in the place setting. And the expression on Dante's face when he realized someone had poisoned a man at his own table. This was no random attack. It had been clean. Internal. Confident. Which meant whoever had done it believed they would survive the fallout. That was the part she could not stop thinking about. So Elena made the mistake. She got in the car. The estate was not what she expected. When people spoke about men like Dante Morti, they imagined excess. Marble staircases. Gold fixtures. Women draped over furniture like expensive carelessness. But the Morti estate sat high above the city behind black iron gates and cypress trees, severe and almost monastic in its design. Stun, bless, silence. Old money trying very hard not to look theatrical. That made it worse. Because true power rarely needed decoration. As the car rolled through the gates, Elena noticed the details automatically. Camera placements. Sight lines. Guard rotation. Secondary exits. Not because she was paranoid. Because once, years ago, someone had taught her that every beautiful place is just a fortress trying to look civilized. The car stopped beneath a covered portico. Another guard opened her door. She stepped out in the same black work shoes she had worn for a 10-hour shift and instantly hated how tired she felt. Inside, the house was warm, dimly lit, and unnervingly quiet. No music. No parties. No women in silk. Only staff moving with the precise, hushed rhythm of people who had long ago learned how to exist around danger without disturbing it. She was led through a corridor lined with old oil paintings and dark walnut paneling into a library large enough to shame a university donor. Dante Morti was standing by the fireplace. Not in a suit this time. Dark trousers. White shirt with the sleeves rolled once at the forearms. No jacket. No tie. No visible weapon. That somehow made him seem more dangerous, not less. Because he looked less like a Don and more like a man who no longer needed costume to command obedience. He turned when she entered. You came. You sent a car. His gaze dropped briefly to the damp hem of her coat. You're still wearing your uniform. I didn't exactly stop for a wardrobe change on the way to my possible execution. One of his brows lifted. Then, unexpectedly, he dismissed the two men behind her with a glance. The doors shut. Now it was just the two of them. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. Dante gestured toward a tray on a side table. Tea, water, with fruit. You haven't eaten. I'm not hungry. That wasn't a question. She folded her arms. If this is your version of hospitality, I'm terrified of your threats. Something in his face almost shifted toward amusement, but didn't quite make it there. Instead, he said, Sit down, Alina. The use of her first name landed strangely. Not intimate. Not yet. Deliberate. She sat because standing any longer would have revealed how badly her legs ached. Dante remained where he was. Watching. Measuring. Bellini is alive, he said. That's good. He regained partial consciousness 20 minutes ago. She looked up sharply. Dante noticed. He said one sentence before sedation, he continued. What sentence? Dante's eyes held hers. It wasn't meant for me. The air in the room changed. Not visibly. But absolutely. Alana sat very still. Then she asked the only question that mattered. Who was the real target? Dante did not answer immediately. That was answer enough. Her pulse kicked once, hard. No, she said quietly. His expression remained unreadable. Alina. No. She stood. The movement was so abrupt the chair legs scraped against the floor. It was your glass, she said, voice low but sharp, not his. Dante said nothing. And in that silence, the entire shape of the night rearranged itself. Bellini had not been the intended victim. He had simply picked up the wrong glass. Or been handed the wrong one. Or sat one seat too far to the left. Which meant the poison had not been a warning. It had been an execution attempt. On Dante Morti. And suddenly Alina understood why she was here. Not because she had saved Bellini. Because she had seen the mechanics of an assassination attempt against one of the most powerful men in the country and lived. You should have told me before I got in the car, she said. You still would have come. No, she said flatly, I would have run. This time he did smile, but only faintly. Maybe. She stared at him. Then, slowly, the deeper horror arrived. If someone inside your circle tried to kill you, she said, then everyone who was in that room tonight is either in danger or part of it. Yes. And you brought me here anyway? Yes. What? That was the real question. Not the poison. Not Bellini. Not even the attempt on Dante's life. Why her? Dante moved away from the fireplace and toward the long table in the center of the room. On it lay several folders, photographs, seating charts, and what looked like scanned security stills from the restaurant. He tapped one image with 2 fingers. Because everyone in my world has a reason to lie to me, he said. You don't. Elena didn't respond. He continued. My men are loyal, but loyalty distorts judgment. My advisors are intelligent, but self-preservation makes cowards of intelligent men. Bellini handled books for 15 years and still didn't notice someone was preparing to bury him under the wrong death. He looked at her directly. You noticed in under 30 seconds. And that means what? That means, Dante said quietly, you see what other people miss. She hated how true that was. Hated even more that he had noticed. I'm not one of your people, she said. I know. I'm not helping you run whatever this is. I'm not asking you to. Then what exactly are you asking? Dante's answer came without hesitation. I want you to tell me what's true. The simplicity of it unsettled her more than any threat could have. Because men like him usually wanted obedience. Silence. Advantage. Not true. At least not spoken plainly. And yet, something in his voice made her believe he meant it. Not because he was noble, but because he was cornered enough to recognize the value of honesty when he found it. Before Alina could answer, the library door opened. Both of them turned. A woman in a pale silk blouse entered first, beautiful, elegant, poised in the brittle way expensive women often were when their authority had never been tested by real danger. Behind her was a little boy of about 8, wearing pajamas and gripping a stuffed wolf under one arm. The woman froze when she saw Alina. Then her expression sharpened instantly. Dante's face changed too, but only slightly. "Lucia," he said. So this was Lucia de Santis, the fiancée, or near enough to one that the city treated her as inevitable. Daughter of a political dynasty. Educated abroad. Photographed at galas. Rumored to be the final polished bridge between the Morty Empire and the kind of legitimacy only old families could buy. Lucia's eyes moved over Alina's black restaurant uniform, then back to Dante. There it was. The assumption. The dismissal. The immediate social ranking. Alina knew that look well. She had been receiving versions of it since she was 16. "I didn't realize you were occupied," Lucia said smoothly. Her tone was flawless. Her contempt was not. The boy beside her, however, looked only confused. And then, unexpectedly, he looked at Alina. Not at her uniform. Not at her class. Not at her place in the room. Of her. Children often do that. They have not yet learned the expensive stupidity of hierarchy. "Papa," he said softly, tugging Dante's hand, "is Uncle Ricardo dead?" The room went still. Alina looked at Dante. Then at the child. Then back at Dante. She hadn't known. Hadn't been told. This was no nephew. No casual family war. The boy had Dante's eyes. Dante's stillness. Dante's impossible way of looking at a room like he was already memorizing its exits. The child was his. And that changed everything. Because men like Dante Morty could survive enemies. Empires could survive betrayal. But children. Children were where monsters became human. And humans became vulnerable. Dante crouched in front of the boy, his voice lower now, stripped of all command. "No, Matteo," he said. "He is alive." The child nodded once, but didn't look convinced. Lucia stepped forward. "He shouldn't be awake." "He had a nightmare," Dante said. "He needs routine, Dante, not this." Her eyes cut briefly toward Alina on the final word. There it was again. Not a woman. A disruption. Something low status and inconvenient standing where it did not belong. Alina should have looked away. Instead, she met Lucia's gaze directly. Not aggressively. Not submissively. Simply without permission. Lucia disliked her immediately. Alina could tell. But what unsettled her more was the child. Because little Dante apparently wrists. At the thin silver bracelet she always wore. His face changed. Slowly. Recognition. Impossible recognition. Then, in a tiny voice, he asked, "Why do you have that bird?" Alina's body went cold. She looked down automatically. The bracelet. A delicate silver charm shaped like a swallow. Small. Ordinary. Almost invisible. No one ever noticed it. No one except people who knew what it meant. She lifted her eyes slowly to the boy. "How do you know this symbol?" she asked. Lucia frowned. "Matteo, enough." But the child didn't answer her. He kept looking at Alina. Then he said the sentence that made the blood leave Dante's face for the first time that night. "My grandmother said only one person was allowed to wear it." Silence. Pure, total silence. Lucia looked between them, confused. Dante rose very slowly to his full height. "Alina," he said, and now his voice had changed again. No longer curious. No longer cautious. Dangerously careful. "Where did you get that bracelet?" Every instinct in her body screamed at her to lie. To laugh. To deflect. To become small again. But Alina had learned another truth a long time ago. Some lies buy safety for a moment and destroy it forever. So she answered carefully. "It belonged to my mother." Dante stared at her. Lucia gave a disbelieving scoff. A bracelet is now relevant to attempted murder? But Dante ignored her completely. His entire attention was on Alina. "What was your mother's name?" She knew in that instant that the room had tilted. That she was standing on the edge of something old and buried and very, very dangerous. And still she answered, Isabella Verla. Lucia looked blank. The child looked confused. But Dante. Dante went utterly still. Not the normal stillness. Not his controlled, predatory composure. This was something else. Something closer to shock. He said nothing for several seconds. Then finally, That's impossible. Elena's pulse thundered once in her ears. Clearly not. Dante's eyes darkened. No, he said, almost to himself. She died. The room seemed to contract around those words. Elena stared at him. How do you know my mother's name? But he wasn't looking at her like a waitress anymore. He wasn't even looking at her like a witness. He was looking at her like a ghost had walked into his house wearing an apron and carrying a tray. Lucia stepped forward, irritation sharpening into suspicion. Dante, what is this? Still he didn't answer. So Lucia tried again. Who is she? That was when Dante finally looked away from Elena. But not toward Lucia. Toward the bracelet. Toward the tiny silver swallow hanging from Elena's wrist like a secret no one had expected to survive. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet it barely sounded human. She is, he said, the daughter of the woman who ended a war. No one moved. Lucia blinked, but Elena heard almost nothing after that. Because for one brutal, disorienting second, the room disappeared and she was no longer in a library full of wealth and danger. She was 9 years old again. Standing in a kitchen at 2 a.m., watching her mother scrub blood off her own knuckles in silence. Listening to the radio hum low while strangers' names passed through coded conversations she was never meant to understand. Her mother, Isabella, had never spoken about the old world directly. Never confessed. Never explained. But there had always been signs. The languages. The legal books. The emergency cash hidden in flour tins. The way dangerous men went quiet when they saw her in public. The way one priest once crossed himself after shaking her hand. Elena had spent most of her adult life convincing herself she had imagined all of it. That grief had exaggerated her mother into myth. Now Dante Morti was standing in front of her confirming the one thing she had never dared ask aloud. Her mother had not merely survived something dangerous. She had once been important inside it. Lucia looked between them both, losing patience. This is absurd. Matteo, go upstairs. The boy hesitated. Dante didn't take his eyes off Elena. Take him, he said. Lucia stiffened, offended by the command more than the content of it, but she recovered quickly and guided the child out. Matteo kept looking back over his shoulder at Elena until the doors closed behind them. And then it was just the two of them again. Only now, the air between them was completely different. No longer stranger and witness. No longer Don and waitress. Now there was history in the room. Not shared history. Was inherited history. Dante moved first. He walked to the bar cart, poured himself water, not whiskey, and drank half the glass in one measured swallow. Then he turned. How old are you? 28. His jaw flexed once. She disappeared 26 years ago. She was alive after that. He looked at her sharply. You were certain? Elena almost laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because sometimes the arrogance of powerful men becomes surreal under pressure. I'm fairly confident I met my own mother. That should have irritated him. Instead, he exhaled something that might have been disbelief. Then he crossed the room and opened a drawer in the desk. From inside, he removed an old black and white photograph. He placed it on the table between them. Elena stepped closer despite herself. There were 3 people in the image. A younger Dante, barely 19, maybe 20, leaner, harder, standing stiff in a dark coat. An older man beside him she immediately recognized from newspaper archives, Vittorio Morti, Dante's father. And between them, a woman. Dark hair pinned back. Severe eyes. A face Elena knew as intimately as her own. Her mother. Much younger. But unmistakable. Elena stared at the photo so long she forgot to breathe. She worked for your family, she said. Dante's expression shifted. No, he said, my family worked because she allowed it. That sentence landed like a blade. And suddenly the old stories she had dismissed as grief or imagination began rearranging themselves into something terrifyingly plausible. Her mother had not merely known dangerous men. She had once been one of the most powerful people around them. Maybe not by title. Maybe not publicly. But then the only currency that truly matters in criminal empires. Information. Elena, Dante said, and there was something new in his voice now. Something rare. Respect. Do you know who your mother really was? She looked up from the photograph and answered honestly. No. Dante held her gaze for one long, charged second. Then he said, You need to. A beat. Then another. And then, as if the night had not already shifted enough, one of the doors burst open without warning. A security man entered too fast for protocol. His face was pale. Dante turned sharply. What? The man's breathing was controlled, but only barely. There's been an incident. Dante's eyes hardened instantly. Where? The guard swallowed. With Matteo. The room stopped. Not metaphorically. Stopped. Elena saw it happen in Dante's face before he moved. All the control. All the calculation. All the steel. Gone in one violent instant. Replaced by something much more dangerous. A father's fear. What happened? Dante demanded. The guard answered quickly. His inhaler was switched. And just like that, Elena understood the truth. The poison had never just been about Dante. Never just about Bellini. This was broader. Fuller. More desperate. Someone inside the house wasn't merely trying to kill Adon. They were trying to destabilize succession. Destroy trust. Destroy bloodline. Destroy legacy. And now a child had become part of the battlefield. That was the moment Helena made the second irreversible decision of the night. Because she saw Dante move toward the door like a man about to become pure violence. And she knew if he entered the next room in that state, truth would die under rage before it could be exposed. So she stepped in front of him. Not dramatically. Not fearlessly. Just deliberately. And said the one thing no one else in his world would have dared say to his face. If you go in there angry, Elena said, the guilty person wins. Dante stopped. Vele. But he stopped. His eyes locked onto hers, dark and lethal and burning with the kind of restrained panic only fathers and monsters ever truly understand. For one terrible second, Elena thought he might push past her anyway. Instead, he stood there breathing once. Then twice. Then he said, through clenched control, What do you suggest? That was the moment the power shifted again. Not because he surrendered. Not because she conquered him. But because in the worst minute of his night, Dante Moi did something almost no powerful man ever does in time to matter. He asked the quiet woman in front of him what was right. And he meant it. Elena held his gaze. Then she answered. We protect the child first, she said, and after that. Her voice lower. We find out which person in this house is already planning the funeral. There are people who believe power announces itself with volume. Raised voices. Slamming doors. Threats sharp enough to split a room in half. But that is the performance of power. It's insecurity. It's theater. Real power does something far more unsettling. It grows quiet when the truth enters. And in the Morty estate, just after midnight, with a child's tampered inhaler sitting on a silver tray like a death sentence interrupted, the truth had entered the room wearing a waitress uniform and sensible black shoes. Elena Verla followed Dante down the corridor at a pace just short of running. Not because she belonged there. Not because anyone had invited her into the family wing of a fortress built for secrecy. But because a child was in danger and morality does not wait for permission. That was the thing people like Lucia and men like Dante and entire empires like theirs often forgot. There are moments when status becomes irrelevant. Moments when all hierarchy collapses into one brutal question. Who is willing to do the right thing first? Matteo's room was at the far end of the east wing. The moment Elena stepped inside, she understood two things immediately. First, this was not a careless household. The room was immaculate but lived in, books on the shelf, a wooden train set partly assembled on the carpet, a reading lamp left on low, a half-finished sketch of wolves and mountains pinned above the desks. Second, someone had violated that safety on purpose. A private physician was already kneeling beside the bed while Matteo sat upright against the pillows, pale but breathing, his small chest rising a little too fast. Lucia stood nearby with both hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. A housekeeper hovered by the doorway, visibly trembling. The inhaler lay on the bedside table. Dante crossed the room in 3 strides. Is he stable? The doctor nodded once. He had mild respiratory distress, but the backup medication worked in time. He's frightened more than harmed. Lucia let out a shaky breath. But Alina didn't, because she had already picked up on the wrong detail. The doctor had said backup medication, which meant someone had known there needed to be backup. Which meant this was not the first time concern had existed around the child's vulnerability. Alina's gaze flicked to the inhaler. Its casing was nearly identical to the standard model. Same shape, same color, same weight, probably. But not the same cap. The cap was newer, glossier, subtle enough to go unnoticed by anyone who wasn't paying attention. Alina stepped closer to the bedside table. Lucia noticed immediately. What are you doing? Look in. You are not a doctor. No, Alina said calmly. I'm the only person here who's still assuming this was planned. That landed badly. Lucia stiffened. You think I'm not? I think panic makes people focus on survival, Alina replied, not taking her eyes off the inhaler. Planning comes after. Lucia opened her mouth, but Dante cut in first. Enough. The single word silenced the room. Alina reached toward the inhaler, then paused and looked at the physician. Did anyone preserve this? The doctor blinked. Preserve. For prints, residue, packaging oils, anything. No, he admitted. My concern was the child. Of course, Alina said, and now my concern is whether someone in this house assumed that would be enough to erase what they touched. She picked up the inhaler with a handkerchief from the bedside table. Dante watched her. Closely. Too closely. There was no longer any skepticism in his expression. Only concentration. And something else. Something heavier. Recognition, perhaps, not of who she was but of what she was capable of when she stopped pretending to be small. Matteo, still pale against the pillows, looked from Alina to his father. Then in a quiet voice he asked, Am I in trouble? That did it. That was the moment the room stopped being about empires and conspiracies and poison and old family wars. Because the real obscenity of corruption is not money. It is not violence. It is the moment children begin believing adult cruelty is somehow their fault. Alina turned before anyone else could answer. No, she said gently, crouching to eye level with him. Not even a little. Matteo looked uncertain, but everyone is mad. They're scared, Alina said. That's different. The child studied her face with that eerie seriousness some children carry when they've grown up around too much silence. Then he nodded once. Satisfied. Lucia stared at Alina like she had just overstepped an invisible boundary. Maybe she had. But Matteo's shoulders had dropped. That mattered more. Dante saw it too. He said nothing. But Alina felt it anyway, the shift in the room, the impossible recalibration of who the child instinctively trusted. And that, in houses like this, was political whether anyone admitted it or not. An hour later, the East Wing was locked down. No staff movement without clearance. No tray service. No housekeeping rotation. No medications touched without triple confirmation. The estate had transformed from elegant residence to controlled crime scene. And Alina was still there. That alone should have terrified her more than it did. But there is a threshold beyond which fear stops feeling sharp and starts feeling logistical. By 2 a.m, Alina was too deep inside the machine to be frightened in ordinary ways. She was in Dante's study again, only this time there were 6 people in the room. Dante at the head of the long table. His chief of security, Marco Rizzi, broad-shouldered and severe. Alina's deputy accountant, a sweating man named Paolo Ferretti. Lucia, immaculate despite the hour, now in a cream cashmere wrap that made her look less like a grieving almost wife and more like someone auditioning for the role. The estate physician. And Alina, still in black slacks and a white service blouse under her work vest. Still the least expensive object in the room. Still, somehow, the person everyone kept glancing toward when silence became uncomfortable. Dante had asked for a reconstruction. A timeline. A vulnerability map. Which meant he had effectively done something unthinkable. He had put a waitress in a war room. No one but him seemed to know what to do with that. Marco was the first to break. With respect, he said, though he clearly had none, I don't understand why she's in this room. Elena didn't answer. She had learned long ago that insecure men often reveal more if you let them perform. Dante looked at Marco only once. That's because, he said, you failed to understand several things tonight. The room went silent. Marco's jaw tightened. He didn't apologize. That was useful information. Men who feel secure in their position apologize when correction is tactical. Men who fear displacement become rigid. Elena tucked that away. Dante gestured to the table. Start. So Marco did. He laid out the estate security timeline first. Matteo had been put to bed at 9:15. Medication tray checked at 9:30 by the nanny. Lucia had visited at 10. A housekeeper had entered at 10:40 to leave tea. At 11:20, the child woke coughing. At 11:23, the inhaler failed. At 11:26, backup medication was administered. Dante listened without interrupting. Then he looked at Elena. What's wrong with it? Marco visibly bristled. Elena ignored him. The sequence is too neat, she said. Lucia frowned, meaning the person who did this expected the first inhaler to be used under stress, not scrutiny. She pointed to the written timeline. If the child had gone into a full respiratory episode, the adults around him would have reacted emotionally, not analytically. No one would have examined the inhaler cap or the canister seal until much later. The doctor nodded reluctantly. That's true. Elena continued. This wasn't meant to be obvious sabotage. It was meant to look like tragic equipment failure. Lucia's face changed slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for Elena. Dante noticed Elena noticing. He said nothing. Paolo Ferretti, the deputy accountant, cleared his throat nervously. So someone in the house wants the boy dead? No, Elena said. Everyone looked at her. She shook her head. Not exactly. Marco crossed his arms. That's a ridiculous distinction. No, she said evenly, it's an important one. She turned slightly, facing the whole table now. People kill children for only a few reasons. Hatred, fear, or inheritance. No one spoke. Elena let the silence breathe. Then she added. This wasn't rage. Rage is messy, personal, immediate. This was procedural. Lucia's expression sharpened. And what exactly is your point? My point, Elena said, is that someone is trying to remove pressure points from succession. That landed like a dropped knife. Paolo looked confused. The doctor looked uncomfortable. Marco looked annoyed. Lucia looked angry. And Dante? Dante looked at Elena with a level of attention that felt almost dangerous to stand under. She kept going. Bellini wasn't the target at the restaurant, she said. You were. She looked at Dante briefly, then continued. And tonight, the child wasn't attacked out of personal malice. He was targeted because if something happened to both of you within a short enough timeline. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room understood the rest. Control fracture. Asset redistribution. Legal confusion. Emergency succession. A coup disguised as tragedy. No gunfire. No dramatic betrayal in a church. No bloody throne room. Just paperwork, funerals, and opportunists. That was how modern empires were stolen. Quietly. Lucia folded her arms. You're making extraordinary assumptions. Elena turned to her. Yes, she said, because ordinary assumptions nearly got 2 people killed tonight. That was the first direct hit. Lucia's face hardened. Marco jumped in immediately, perhaps too quickly. We should focus on staff access. The nanny, the maid, the kitchen rotation. No, Elena said. Marco looked at her with open irritation now. No. No, she repeated, because if you start with staff, you'll get exactly what whoever planned this wants. Which is a disposable culprit. The room still. Elena stepped toward the timeline board. The person behind this doesn't need to touch the inhaler themselves. They need access, yes, but not necessarily proximity. They need influence over routine, over assumptions, over who gets blamed first. She looked directly at Marco. People like that don't usually wash dishes. Marco's face darkened. Lucia looked away first. Dante saw that too. Elena felt the shape of the room tightening around an unspoken truth. Not enough to accuse. Not yet. But enough to know she was circling the right fire. By 3 in the morning, Dante had dismissed everyone except Elena. That should have made her feel singled out. Instead, it made her tired. She stood by the study window, arms folded against the chill of the glass, watching the estate grounds disappear into darkness beyond the security lights. Dante remained near the desk, reading over the preliminary household access reports with the same terrifying concentration he seemed to bring to everything. After several minutes, he spoke without looking up. "You're angry." Elena let out a short breath through her nose. "That's perceptive. You hide it well." "I've had practice." He looked up then. Only for a second. But it was enough. He was not asking casually. He was filing her answers away. Every one of them. "You should go home," he said. She turned to face him fully. "Should I?" His expression remained unreadable. "You have a brother." Her body went perfectly still. "How do you know that?" "You were emergency contact on the employee file." That should have reassured her. It did, because now she knew exactly how fast his world could learn things. "And if I go home," she said carefully, "do I stay uninvolved?" Dante leaned back slightly against the desk. "No. Honest. At least that." She nodded once, unsurprised. "Then don't pretend this is about my safety." A long pause. Then, quietly, he said, "Fine." He set the papers down. "This is not about your safety." Elena waited. Dante held her gaze. "It's about leverage," he said. "You've seen too much, understood too much, and if the wrong people realize I'm listening to you, they'll come for me." Yes. There it was. Not romanticized. Not softened. Not dressed up as protection. Just the truth. And somehow, because he had said it plainly, she trusted him more than if he had lied. That was the dangerous thing about Dante Morti. Not that he was gentle. Not that he was good. But that when he decided to be honest, he became impossible to dismiss. "So what now?" she asked. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "You stay here." Elena stared at him. "No." "You'd be safer." "No." He straightened. "Elena." I said no. The word hit the room harder than she intended, but she didn't take it back. Because she was tired. Because she was frightened. Because she had spent too many years being maneuvered by emergencies created by other people's power. "I am not becoming a hostage in a beautiful prison because your empire has internal rot," she said. Dante's expression darkened not with anger exactly, but with resistance. "This isn't imprisonment. It becomes imprisonment the second I don't get to leave freely. That's not what I'm offering." "No," she asked sharply. "Then say the words." He went still. And she held his gaze without flinching. "Say that if I walk out of this house right now," she said, "no one will stop me." Silence. A terrible one. Because now the truth mattered more than comfort. Dante looked at her for several seconds. Then, finally, "If you walk out right now," he said quietly, "I won't stop you." That mattered. Not because she fully believed the world would let her leave cleanly, but because he had given her the only thing power almost never gives: truth. "Choice." She nodded once. Then said, "Good." Dante exhaled slowly. "Stay anyway." She almost laughed. Almost. Convincing. This time, he did let a trace of humor through. Very faint. Very brief. Then it was gone. "I need someone near this who doesn't belong to it," he said. "Someone who can see what my people can't." "That's not enough." "What is enough?" And there it was. The midpoint before the midpoint. The question beneath all the others. Not what he wanted. What she required. Elena straightened slightly. If she was going to step closer to this fire, it would not be as an obedient witness. It would be on terms. Her terms. So she gave them. "If I stay involved," she said, "I don't answer to your temper." Dante said nothing. I don't lie for you, she continued. I don't help bury innocent people to protect your reputation. I don't become useful only until it's inconvenient. And if a child is involved, your child or anyone else's, then that becomes the line. The absolute line. Still, he said nothing. Elena took one breath. Then finished. And if I tell you something is immoral, you don't punish me for saying it. That one hung between them. Heavy. Because it wasn't logistical. It was personal. It was the difference between a tyrant and a man trying, however imperfectly, not to become his father. Dante looked at her for a very long time. Then he nodded once. Done. Just like that. No negotiation. No mockery. No wounded ego. Done. And that unsettled her more than refusal would have. Because powerful men usually needed to dominate the terms before they could accept them. Dante accepted them because he had already understood something vital. He did not need Elena's obedience. He needed her integrity intact. And for the first time since she entered his world, Elena felt the shape of the role forming around her. Not servant. Not captive. Not mistress. Not pawn. Something rarer. A witness with leverage. A civilian with moral authority inside a criminal empire. That was far more destabilizing than a gun. At dawn, Elena was given a guest suite she did not want. She showered in a bathroom larger than her apartment kitchen and stood under hot water until her muscles stopped shaking. When she finally emerged, someone had placed folded clothes on the bed: simple black trousers, a cream sweater, soft socks. No assumption. No silk trap disguised as generosity. She appreciated that more than she wanted to. She was tying back her damp hair when there was a knock at the door. Not aggressive. Not hesitant either. She opened it to find Matteo standing there in socks, clutching the stuffed wolf from the night before. No guard. No nanny. No Lucia. Just the child. Elena frowned. You shouldn't be wandering. I know. That usually means you're about to do it anyway. He looked down. I had a question. There are few things in this world more dangerous than a powerful child asking a sincere question. Because children raised around violence often learn too early to stop asking. Elena crouched slightly so he wouldn't have to crane his neck. What is it? Matteo looked at her bracelet again. Then up at her face. Are you the woman Nana was scared of? The breath left Helena's lungs. Not dramatically. Just enough to remind her that the past was no longer dead. And somewhere, inside this house, someone else was likely beginning to realize that too. She should have told him no. Should have laughed it off. Should have said children misunderstood things. Instead, she answered the only honest way she could. I think, she said carefully, your grandmother may have been scared of women who told the truth. Matteo considered that. Then he nodded as if that made perfect sense. Children often understand morality faster than adults. That was when Dante's voice came from the corridor behind him. She is right. Elena looked up. Dante stood a few feet away, one hand in his pocket, tie still undone, face harder than the morning deserved. He had clearly been searching for the boy. But he wasn't angry. Not at Matteo. And not, Elena noticed, at finding him here. Matteo turned. Papa, was Nana bad? Silence. Pure and difficult. Dante did not answer quickly. Good. That meant he was choosing truth over convenience. Eventually, he crouched beside his son. She loved badly, he said. It was such a precise answer, Elena felt it in her chest. Matteo frowned. What does that mean? Dante looked at him. It means some people think protecting what they love gives them permission to hurt other people. Matteo was quiet. Then he asked, do you do that? The question hit harder than any accusation in the night had. Elena saw it land. Saw the infinitesimal fracture in Dante's composure. And for one suspended second, the dawn of the city looked like nothing more or less than a father being asked if he had become the thing he hated. When he answered, his voice was very low. I'm trying not to. Matteo nodded. Satisfied, or at least willing to accept the answer for now. Then he wandered back down the corridor with the wolf tucked under one arm. Dante and Elena were left standing in the morning quiet. He looked at her. You're good with him. She crossed her arms lightly. He is a child, not a negotiation. That's exactly why. Something about the way he said it made her look at him more carefully. Not as a don. Not as a man who could order violence with a glance. As someone who had perhaps grown up so surrounded by manipulation that simple kindness still startled him. That thought was dangerous. So she pushed it away. "We need to talk about Bellina's files," she said. Dante's expression shifted instantly back toward business. "Good. Safer." "Yes," he said, and after that, he held her gaze. "I'm going to show you why your mother's name was buried." Elena went very still. Because she knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever came next would not merely explain her mother. It would explain her too. Why she had always noticed too much. Why danger felt familiar. Why men with inherited power kept pausing when she spoke. And most of all, why the underworld had once feared a woman who never raised her voice. She had entered this house as a waitress who interrupted a poisoning. By the end of the day, she would begin learning that she had not stepped into Dante Morti's war by accident. She had been born much closer to it than anyone had ever allowed her to know. And somewhere inside the estate, behind polished manners and controlled expressions, the real villain was already adapting. Already watching. Already realizing that the invisible woman in the apron had become the most dangerous variable in the house. Not because she had money. Not because she had guards. Not because she could kill. But because for the first time in a very long time, someone inside the Morty Empire could not be bought, frightened, seduced, or controlled. And that made Elena Verla more threatening than her rival family ever could. By noon, the estate no longer felt like a home. It felt like a machine under inspection. Every corridor was quieter. Every servant more careful. Every guard a little too alert, as if suspicion itself had become part of the architecture. And still, beneath all that discipline, Elena could feel it. Panic. Not the loud kind. The expensive kind. The kind that wears polished shoes, lowers its voice, and starts deleting records before breakfast. That was the first thing she thought when Dante led her into Bellini's private records room on the lower floor of the estate. Not office. Not study. Records room. Which told her almost everything she needed to know about how Dante Morti truly understood power. The shelves were floor-to-ceiling, climate-controlled, and arranged with the kind of obsessive precision that only men who feared betrayal ever invest in. Paper files. Bound ledgers. Encrypted hard drives. Locked archival cabinets. This wasn't vanity. This was war planning. "Your accountant kept all this here?" Elena asked. Dante closed the door behind him. Bellini trusted paper more than servers. He was right. Dante's mouth moved slightly, almost approving. He usually was. The room smelled faintly of leather, dust, and expensive caution. Elena moved slowly between the shelves, reading labels, scanning date stamps, tracking the organizational logic. Her fatigue was still there, but underneath it another part of her had awakened now, cold, precise, impossible to lull back to sleep. This was where the truth lived. And truth, unlike power, always leaves paperwork. That was the thing people forgot. They thought corruption was smoke and whispers and men in dark cars. It wasn't. Corruption was almost always administrative. Invoices. Signatures. Shipping codes. Insurance riders. Emergency legal authorizations signed at 2:14 a.m. while everyone else was too distracted by blood to notice. If someone but preparation. Dante stood back and let her work. That mattered. Most powerful men claimed to want capable women near them, but the second competence threatened their ego. They began interrupting, explaining, hovering, reasserting control through useless noise. Dante did none of that. He watched. He listened. And he left the room quiet enough for her mind to sharpen. Elena moved first toward the shipping and customs files. Because poison doesn't simply appear. Tampered inhalers don't spontaneously replace themselves. Assassinations, despite what movies tell people, are logistics problems before they become moral ones. And logistics always have a trail. She scanned through import records from Dante's pharmaceutical shell company, then private estate procurement logs, then Bellina's coded notations in the margins of expense ledgers. At first, nothing. Then something small. A recurring vendor code. Not suspicious on its own. Not dramatic. But inconsistent. The same supplier had been used for estate medical equipment for nearly 5 years except twice in the last 4 months, when a temporary substitute vendor had been authorized under urgent continuity exceptions. Alina's eyes narrowed. "What's wrong?" Dante asked. She held up the page. "Who approves emergency continuity substitutions?" "Usually Bellini or Marco. Not household staff." "No." She turned the file toward him. "Then either your accountant was compromised before last night." She tapped the second authorization line. "Or someone with high-level clearance has been quietly changing procurement pathways." Dante's face darkened. He stepped closer, reading the code. "Can you trace it?" "Probably." "Probably." She looked up at him. "Do you want confidence theater or accuracy?" That almost earned a smile. "Almost. Accuracy." "Then yes," she said, "but not in 10 minutes and not if your people keep trying to impress you instead of helping." His gaze held hers for a second too long. Then he nodded once and walked to the intercom. "Send Rizzi in," he said. Marco arrived less than 2 minutes later. He entered already tense, the kind of man who had built his identity on being indispensable and now sensed with animal clarity that the room no longer revolved around him. Dante handed him the file without preamble. "What is this?" Marco scanned it, frowning. "Medical procurement." "I can read, Marco." It paused. Marco continued more carefully. "Continuity substitution happens when approved vendors miss timing." "Twice in 4 months?" Alina asked. Marco looked at her, irritation immediate. "Sometimes there are delays." "With controlled respiratory medication?" His jaw tightened. "What are you implying?" Alina folded her arms. "That either your system is sloppy or someone inside it knows exactly where the gaps are." Marco looked at Dante. "And we're taking accusations from a waitress now?" The room went still. Not because the insult was shocking. Because everyone in it knew he had just made a mistake. Dante did not raise his voice. That made what came next much worse. "You will refer to her," he said, "as a mess. Villa." Marco blinked once. Then straightened. It was subtle, but Alina saw at the tiny recalibration of status in his posture. That mattered. Because in dangerous hierarchies, respect is often established not by affection but by who gets corrected in front of whom. Dante continued. "And if she asks you a question," he said, "you answer it." Marco's face hardened with the controlled humiliation of a man being publicly repositioned. But he nodded. Alina did not enjoy the moment. That was important. She had no appetite for dominance. Only function. And function required clarity. So she kept going. "I need the chain of authorization for every medical and estate supply override in the last 6 months," she said. "Digital and paper. Also who physically received the deliveries." Marco stared at her like he wanted to argue. Dante spared him the option. "You have an hour." Marco left. The door shut harder than necessary. Alina exhaled quietly. Dante looked at her. "You don't enjoy humiliating people." "No. But you'll do it if they stand between you and the truth." She met his gaze. "Yes." He nodded once, as if confirming something he had already suspected. That should have unsettled her. Instead, what unsettled her was how little she needed to explain herself around him now. That was how dangerous proximity begins. Not with touch. Not with lying. But with recognition. An hour later, the records room had transformed into a forensic battlefield. Marco returned with procurement logs. Bellina's deputy sent over insurance riders. 2 legal binders were pulled from a private archive. 3 laptops sat open across the table. Alina stood in the middle of it all, sleeves rolled, reading through overlapping contracts with the kind of concentration that makes people either deeply trust you or quietly fear you. By mid-afternoon, she had found the first real fracture. Not in the medical files. In the trust documents. That was where the betrayal lived. Not in poison. Not in inhalers. Not in the operational methods. In inheritance architecture. That was the thing about internal villains in powerful families. They rarely begin with murder. They begin with paperwork designed to become useful if murder succeeds. Alina spread 3 documents side by side across the table. Dante came around to stand beside her. close enough that she could feel the warmth of him before she registered it. She ignored that. Focus. Your primary estate trust has a mortality contingency, she said. Obviously. Yes, but the wording changed 11 weeks ago. That got his attention. It was amended. Not exactly. She pointed to the page. It was administratively clarified. That sounds harmless. It isn't. Dante bent slightly to read. His shoulder nearly brushed hers. Still, he kept talking. This clause used to route interim guardianship and executive holding authority separately if anything happened to you. She tapped the older version. Now they're merged under emergency continuity language. His eyes sharpened. And if you die unexpectedly while Matteo is still a minor. She shifted her finger lower. The person who gains temporary authority over both his personal guardianship framework and several key holding structures. She looked up. Is Lucia? The room changed temperature. Dante went perfectly still. Not shocked. Was? Oh, he asked. It's legal, Alina said, or legal enough to survive for months before challenge. Long enough to consolidate, erase, redirect, and claim stability. He looked back at the page. His expression had become almost unreadable now, but Alina saw it anyway, that flicker beneath control. Not heartbreak. Not exactly. Disgust, maybe. At himself. At what he had allowed too close. Would Bellini have known? He asked. Yes. And if he objected? He becomes inconvenient. Dante's jaw flexed once. Then he straightened slowly, hands braced against the table. Say it clearly. So she did. Bellini was likely poisoned because he found the legal shift. A beat. And Matteo is targeted because he is the structure that makes Lucia powerful if you die. Silence. Clean and devastating. Dante turned away from the table and walked to the far wall. Not pacing. He was too controlled for pacing. But Alina could feel the violence in the stillness of his back. He was not a man accustomed to being surprised inside his own walls. And betrayal from strangers is one thing. Betrayal from someone already inside the family perimeter is something else entirely. That kind of betrayal doesn't just threaten power. It humiliates judgment. And men like Dante Morti could survive many things. Humiliation was not one of them. When he finally spoke, his voice was very low. She has been in my son's life for 2 years. Elena said nothing. She has sat at my table, read to him, traveled with him. Still Elena said nothing. Because this was the moment when truth must not become performance. And then Dante turned. His expression was no longer angry. It was worse. Resolve. Bring her in, he said. Elena straightened instantly. No. He looked at her sharply. No. No. His voice sharpened. She tampered with my child's medication. Allegedly. The word hit him like an insult. He needed to hear it. You think I need more evidence? He asked. Yes. That one landed harder. She stepped closer before he could answer. If you confront her now, one of two things happens, Elena said. Either she panics and destroys whatever is left, or she adapts before we know who else is involved. Dante's eyes were dark now, furious in that terrifyingly controlled way only powerful men ever become. She endangered my son. I know. She tried to murder me. I know. She is in my house. And that, Elena said evenly, is exactly why you do not move too early. Silence. His breathing was controlled. Lily. She held his gaze and kept her own voice calm. Do you want revenge, she asked, or do you want the truth? That was the question. Not tactical. Not procedural. Well, because violence is easy for men like him. Evidence is harder. Restraint is hardest of all. Dante stared at her. And for one long, terrible second, Elena saw exactly who he could become if he let grief and fury decide for him. Then, slowly, very slowly, he stepped back from the edge. What do you suggest? He asked. Again he had asked her. Again he had chosen discipline over ego. Again power had paused in front of truth. And Elena felt something in her chest tighten in a way she did not want to examine. We watch, she said. For how long? long enough for her to believe she's still ahead. Dante's gaze stayed on her face. Then he nodded once. Fine. She exhaled. Not relief. Just survival. He moved back to the table. What do you need? That was the moment. The real midpoint turn. Not the poison. Not the estate. Not the files. This. The moment she crossed from accidental witness into deliberate participant. And if she was going to do it, she would do it properly. So Alina said the thing that changed the structure of the war. I need access. Dante didn't flinch. How much? All of it. A beat? Household logs, legal amendments, Alina's private ledgers, security footage, visa records, offshore transfers if they touch succession or procurement, anything that can expose motive. He studied her. And if what you find implicates someone I care about. Alina held his gaze. Then you will have to decide whether you want to keep your empire. Her voice lower. Or deserve your son. The words landed hard enough to alter the air. No one else in his world would have dared say that to him. No one else could have survived saying it. But Dante did not lash out. He did not threaten. He did not punish. He only looked at her for a very long time. Then said, quietly, You already know the answer. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't performance. It was something far more dangerous. Trust. And she wasn't ready for how much that unsettled her. That evening, Alina entered Dante Morti's inner circle officially. Not with a title. Not with a gun. Not with a ring or blood oath or anything theatrical. With a password. He handed her a secure access card, a temporary encryption token, and Alina's sealed archive key. These only work in-house, he said. No one else has this level of access outside legal. Alina took them carefully. Then this is a bad idea. Yes, he said, is. She almost smiled. Almost. Then Lucia entered the room. No announcement. No hesitation. Beautiful people often move through private spaces like they were born believing every door belongs to them. Lucia wore cream silk again, hair perfect, expression composed. Only her eyes betrayed anything. They were too alert. Too measured. She knew something had shifted. Maybe not what. But enough. Alina, she said pleasantly, as if tasting the name for poison. I didn't realize you were still here. Alina met her gaze. I'm difficult to remove. Lucia smiled without warmth. I've noticed. Dante said nothing. That was strategic. He was letting the room breathe. Letting people reveal themselves. Lucia turned to him. Your lawyer called. The board wants reassurance after last night. Then reassure them. I tried, Lucia said lightly, but it's hard when no one knows why a restaurant incident became a lockdown. Restaurant incident. Not poisoning. Not attempted murder. Language matter. And people always revealed themselves in the words they chose to minimize danger. Alina filed that away. Lucia's eyes flicked briefly to the access card in Alina's hand. A reaction. Tiny. Fast. But real. Then Lucia looked back at Dante. May I speak with you privately? No, Dante said. Just like that. No apology. No softening. Lucia blinked. Only once. But Alina saw it. That was not a woman used to hearing no. And that mattered almost as much as guilt. Because entitlement under pressure always cracks before innocence does. Lucia recovered quickly. Of course, she said. I only thought we should discuss Matteo's schedule. It may not be wise to have unfamiliar people around him while he's unsettled. The sentence was elegant. Weaponize. Polite. Poison. Alina didn't respond. Dante did. Matteo decides who unsettles him. Lucia's composure fractured for half a second. Then returned. She smiled again. This one colder. Very well. She turned and left. The door shut softly behind her. Alina looked at Dante. That was deliberate. Yes. She's probing for position. Yes. And you just told her she's losing it. He met her gaze. Yes. Alina exhaled through her nose. That may accelerate things. I know. Then why do it? This time his answer came slower. Not because he didn't know. Because he did. And the truth costs something. Because, he said quietly, if she can stand in the same room after what happened to my son and still measure influence before remorse. He looked toward the closed door. Then I needed to see it with my own eyes. That was the first truly human thing he had said all day. Not tactical. Not strategic. Just hurt, disciplined into stillness. And that, Elena realized, was perhaps the most dangerous thing about Dante Morti. Not his violence. Not his empire. But the fact that somewhere beneath all of it was a man who, once he recognized betrayal clearly enough, would never forgive it. Not theatrically. Not loudly. Just completely. Near midnight, Elena found the second major break. This one hidden inside Belena's private annotation system. At first glance, it looked like meaningless shorthand symbols, arrows, old-style bookkeeping marks. But once she identified the structure, she realized Bellini hadn't been tracking money. He had been tracking pressure points. Who owed whom? Which politician was over-leveraged? Which shell company had become too visible? Which legitimate donor channels had been repurposed for illicit routing? And beside one set of entries tied to a medical import corridor and a trust amendment firm, Bellini had written 3 words in tight, hurried script. She moved first. Elena stared at the page for several seconds. Then she turned it over. Nothing. She checked the margin. There, almost hidden in the spine fold, was a second note. A name fragment. Not full. Just enough. That was all. No surname. No clarity. Just enough to freeze the blood in her veins. Not proof. But close enough to become dangerous. She was still staring at it when Dante entered quietly behind her. You found something. It wasn't a question. Elena looked up slowly. Yes. He came around the desk and stopped beside her. She handed him the ledger. He read the notation once. Then again. When he saw the fragment, something in his face went utterly still. She knew he knew, Elena said. Dante didn't answer. His eyes remained on the page. Then he asked, very softly, Do you think she acted alone? Elena thought of Marco's defensiveness. The procurement overrides. The timing. The confidence. The child's inhaler. The legal architecture already in place. No, she said. And Dante nodded once. Because of course not. Women like Lucia did not usually execute operational sabotage alone. They influenced, redirected, selected, incentivized, which meant there was at least one more person inside the machine. Someone practical. Someone with systems access. Someone comfortable turning intent into method. Someone close enough to move without being seen. And if Elena was right, that person was likely already watching them back. Dante closed the ledger. Then he looked at her. From this point forward, he said, you don't move anywhere in this house alone. She opened her mouth immediately. No. He ignored that. You'll have one female security escort, not visible unless needed. No. Elena. I said no. His expression hardened slightly. This is not negotiable. She stood. It becomes negotiable the second my freedom starts shrinking in the name of protection. His jaw flexed. You are already in danger. Yes, she said, stepping closer, and if I let your fear turn me into a managed asset, then I stop being useful. That landed. Because it was true. And truth, once again, was proving more inconvenient than control. Dante looked at her for a long moment. Then, very deliberately, he asked, What would make you say yes? There it was again. That thing he kept doing that made him impossible to reduce into the men she had spent her life surviving. He kept asking. Not demanding. Not deciding for her. Asking. So Elena answered carefully. One condition, she said. His eyes held hers. Name it. I choose who's near me, she said, and if I say someone leaves, they leave. No questions, no ego. If possible. Then Dante nodded once. Done. And just like that, the line was drawn. Not between them. Between the kind of power he had inherited, and the kind of power she would tolerate. By the time the clock passed 1 in the morning, Elena had done something almost no one in Dante Morti's world had ever managed. She had entered his inner circle, without surrendering herself to it. And somewhere in the house, perhaps behind a composed smile or a soldier's silence, the villain had begun to understand the real problem. The waitress was not temporary. She was not frightened enough, not dazzled enough, not corruptible enough. And worst of all, Dante Morti had started trusting her more than the people he had known for years. That was not just dangerous. In houses like this, that was how empires cracked from the inside. There is a point in every dangerous story where the truth stops being theoretical. A point where suspicion hardens into action. Where politeness peels away. Where the people smiling across polished tables decide the witness has become too expensive to leave alive. And when that moment comes, it does not always announce itself with gunfire. Sometimes it begins with a hallway that is too quiet. Elena felt it before she understood it. It was just after 2 in the morning when she left the records room with Bellini's annotated ledger tucked inside a slim leather folio and the access card clipped inside her sweater pocket. The estate had gone still in that eerie, curated way only powerful homes ever do after midnight, silent enough to seem peaceful, controlled enough to feel false. Most people mistake quiet for safety. Helena never had. She had learned too young that silence often meant someone had already made a decision. She turned down the east corridor instead of the main stairwell because instinct told her to avoid open sightlines. She moved quickly, but without panic, soft soles against old wood, one hand on the folio, mind already building the next day's sequence. The name fragment mattered. The trust amendment mattered. The procurement override mattered. But most of all, the timing mattered. Whoever had moved against Bellini and Matteo would not wait long once they realized Bellini had left notes and Elena had access to them. Which meant the next move would come soon. Maybe against Bellini in the hospital. Maybe against Dante directly. Maybe. A sound behind her. Tiny. But not a footstep. The whisper of a door easing shut. Elena didn't turn immediately. That was survival too. Never reward a hunter by confirming you've noticed them too soon. She kept walking. One pace. Then another. Then she saw it. A shadow moving in the reflection of the glass cabinet ahead. Not a state staff. Too broad. Too deliberate. Too quiet. Her pulse sharpened. The corridor ahead split left toward the private chapel and right toward the old winter garden. Open routes. Bad routes. No visible exits. No guards. No one should have been here. Elena's body made the decision before her mind did. She turned hard into the service elbow to her right just as something heavy slammed into the wall where her head had been. The sound cracked through the corridor like a muffled shot. Not a bullet. A weighted baton. Or a short impact tool. The attacker moved fast. Fast. Professional enough not to speak. Elena drove the folio into his face and pivoted low under the second swing. Pain sliced through her shoulder as the edge clipped bone anyway, but adrenaline buried it instantly. She grabbed the nearest object, a brass fire extinguisher from the alcove bracket, and swung with both hands. The impact connected with his knee. He stumbled. She ran. Not elegantly. Not heroically. Survival is rarely cinematic when it's happening. She sprinted down the service passage, lungs burning, heart hammering, the old building unfolding in fragments around her, linen storage, back stairs, kitchen access, cellar descent. Behind her, footfalls. That. Still coming. He had not expected resistance. That bought her seconds. Only seconds. She hit the stairwell door and almost collided with another body coming up. A hand caught her wrist. She reacted instantly, twisting hard, ready to drive an elbow into her throat. Elena. Dante. Everything stopped and accelerated at once. He caught her shoulders before she could fall. What happened? Someone, she gasped, turning back toward the stairwell. They were waiting. The attacker was already gone. Of course he was. Predators like that never stay once surprise is lost. Dante's face changed in one brutal instant. Not confusion. Not concern. Violence. Pure, disciplined violence. He looked past her into the corridor and called one word sharp enough to cut steel. Marco. The estate exploded into motion. Within seconds, guards were flooding the corridor. Doors opened, radios crackled. The silence of the house shattered into controlled emergency. Elena was still breathing too hard when Dante looked back at her and saw the blood. His expression went cold. Where are you hurt? It's nothing. His voice dropped. Where? My shoulder. He didn't ask again. He took the folio from her, handed it to the nearest guard without looking, and guided her firmly, not roughly, back toward the study. His hand stayed at the small of her back the entire way. That should not have mattered. But it did. Not romantically. Not yet. In another life, maybe it would have felt protective. Here, in this one, it felt like something else. Like the terrible, irreversible moment a man used to controlling outcomes realizes he almost failed to protect the one person he cannot afford to lose. That was more dangerous than desire. Because desire can be denied. Need changes behavior. The physician arrived within minutes. A bruised shoulder. Minor soft tissue damage. No fracture. The lean following. When he left, Dante dismissed everyone else too. That should have become predictable by now. It didn't. The door shut. The room went quiet. Elena reached automatically for the folio before remembering Dante had taken it. He was standing at the desk, one hand braced against the wood, his face shadowed by the low lamp behind him. You were right, he said. Elena looked up. This is not strategic delay anymore. They're cleaning the board. She flexed her fingers once, willing the tremor out of them. You sound surprised. I'm not surprised they moved. He looked at her. I'm surprised they moved this quickly. That was honest. And honesty, in rooms like this, was always more frightening than rage. Elena stood slowly, shoulder protesting. They know Bellini left something. Yes. They know I found it. Yes. And if they were willing to attack me inside your house, then someone believes they still have enough protection to survive being wrong. Dante's voice had gone flat. That was never a good sign. Because men like him are most dangerous not when they shout, but when they become mathematically calm. He pushed away from the desk and crossed the room to where she stood. Not too close, but close enough that she had to tilt her chin slightly to hold his gaze. I need the name, he said. Elena stared at him. There isn't one yet. There's enough. No. His jaw tightened. Elena. No. The word hit hard enough to stop him. She was shaking now, though not from fear alone. From pain. From adrenaline. From fury. Because this was the moment stories like this often break in the wrong direction. The moment a powerful man convinces himself instinct is justice. And if Dante moved now without proof, he would not just destroy the wrong people. He would destroy the truth itself. So Lena stepped closer, ignoring the ache in her shoulder. If you accuse the wrong person too early, the real one disappears, she said. If you punish on instinct, everyone else closes ranks. If you turn this into a blood purge because you're angry. Her voice lower. Then whoever did this gets exactly what they wanted. Dante looked at her like he wanted to disagree and knew he couldn't. His voice came quieter now. They came for you. I know. That was the part neither of them had yet said plainly. Not because it was tactically relevant. Because it was personal now. And personal danger changes everything. Dante's gaze dropped briefly to the compression wrap beneath her collarbone where it disappeared under the sweater, then back to her face. You should hate me for that, he said. Elena blinked. The admission was so stripped of performance she almost missed how raw it was. For what? For bringing you into this. She held his gaze for a long second. Then said the only true thing. I chose to stay. Something moved in his expression then. Not relief. Not quite. Respect, perhaps. And something deeper under it. Something he was too disciplined to name. That made two of them. Before either could say more, Marco entered without knocking. That alone was enough to sharpen Elena's attention. Men who enter too quickly after violence often do so because they are afraid of what has already been discovered. Marco's face was controlled, but only just. We swept the corridor, he said. No cameras caught a clear face. Convenient, Elena said. Marco ignored her. West's stairwell lock was manually disengaged. Whoever it was knew the blind spots. Dante's expression hardened. That narrows the field. Marco nodded. House access, internal movement knowledge, and security timing. Elena watched him as he spoke. Too prepared. Too clean. Too eager to present the frame. Not guilt, necessarily, but proximity. Sometimes the internal villain is not the mastermind. Sometimes he is simply the man arrogant enough to believe he can manage the consequences. And Marco Rizzi was beginning to look like exactly that kind of man. Dante extended the ledger note fragment toward him. Marco took it, read it, and looked up too slowly. That was the moment. Smell. That's almost invisible. But Elena saw it. Recognition before performance. His eyes had understood the name fragment before his face arranged itself into confusion. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. What? Dante asked. Marco handed the page back. Could mean anything. Does it? Elena asked softly. He looked at her. You seem eager for it to mean something. No, she said. I'm eager for liars to get tired. The air tightened. Dante said nothing. That was strategic now. He was watching both of them. Let him. Marco folded his arms. If you have an accusation, make it. Elena held his gaze. Then, calmly. You knew where the corridor blind spots were. His expression didn't move. Of course I did. I built them. Exactly. He gave a humorless laugh. That's your evidence? No, she said. My evidence is that every time operational access becomes relevant, you answer before anyone asks. You've been managing the shape of the story since yesterday. Marco's face hardened. Because that's my job. Is it? Elena asked. Or is your job making sure the right people look guilty first? Dante finally spoke. Marco. One word. Enough. Marco turned to him. You're going to let this happen? Dante's eyes stayed on him. Answer the question. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Marco looked between them both, then exhaled through his nose. You want truth? He said. Fine. His tone changed. That was the first sign. Not panic. Contempt. The contempt of a man who believes he has earned the right to betrayal because he was never appreciated enough while being loyal. That kind of man is always dangerous. I did not poison Bellini, Marco said, and I did not touch the child's medication. Elena didn't blink. Those are very specific denials. Marco's eyes cut to her. Because unlike you, I understand how this world works. No, Elena said quietly, unlike me, you think understanding corruption excuses participating in it. That landed. Huh? Marco looked at Dante now, not her. And there it was. The real fracture. Not servant versus outsider. Old loyalty versus inconvenient truth. I protected this house for 12 years, Marco said. 12. Through raids, leaks, rival shipments, internal disputes, your father's ghosts, your mother's games, everything. Dante's face did not change. But Elena felt it. The room had just crossed into confession. Marco kept going. And for what? To watch you hand access to a stranger in an apron because she reads ledgers and says difficult things in a calm voice? Elena stayed still. Let him reveal himself. That was the trick with men like Marco. If you interrupt too early, they retreat into discipline. If you let them speak, ego does half the prosecution for you. Dante's voice remained terrifyingly quiet. Who are you covering? Marco laughed once, bitter and short. Still asking the wrong question. No, Elena said. Now Marco looked at her. And Elena stepped closer. Not recklessly. Precisely. The right question, she said, is what you thought you were going to gain when all of this was over. Silence. His jaw flexed. That was answer enough. Elena kept going. You didn't move first, she said. You're not ambitious enough for that. But you saw the opening. Lucia promised continuity, relevance, maybe control over the security and logistics structure after transition. Marco said nothing. Dante's eyes shifted almost imperceptibly. Elena continued. And Bellini found the legal amendments, so someone had to remove him before he could bring the documents to Dante. Still nothing. Then Matteo became the second pressure point, Elena said. Not because you wanted a child dead, necessarily. Men like you always tell yourselves that part is collateral, temporary, a means to preserve order. Marco's face had gone pale now beneath the anger. She knew she was right. Not every detail, but enough. And the most dangerous thing you can do to a morally compromised man is describe him accurately before he's ready. Do you think, Elena asked softly, that helping a polished woman in silk steal a child's future would finally make you matter? Marco moved. That's too fast for anyone else to react. But Elena had been waiting for it. He lunged toward the desk drawer where Dante kept his secondary sidearm. Dante was faster. The gun was already in his hand before Marco cleared the corner. 2 seconds. One brutal collision. Marco hit the desk. Dante drove him back with one arm and the muzzle pressed hard beneath his jaw. The room exploded into motion and then froze. Pure frozen violence. Elena stood perfectly still. Her heart was slamming so hard she could hear it. Marco's breathing came ragged. Dante's came not at all. He looked almost calm. That was what made him terrifying. Because now death was not emotional. It was available. One twitch. One decision. One old instinct. And Marco Rizzi would die on the study floor. No court. No confession. No full truth. Just blood and relief. Elena saw the choice arrive in Dante's face. And she knew if he crossed this line now, the story would end the way stories like this always ended. With power choosing itself over truth. So she stepped forward. Don't. Dante did not look at her. Marco made a strangled sound under the pressure of the gun. Elena, Dante said quietly, step back. No. His voice sharpened, step back. No. That got his attention. Finally his eyes flicked to her. He'll. One breath away from irreversible. And Elena held his gaze anyway. If you kill him now, she said, you protect your anger, not your son. The room went dead silent. Marco stopped struggling. Dante's face did not move. She kept going. Lucia is still out there. Bellini may still die. The legal chain is incomplete. The procurement route is not fully mapped. And if Marco dies before he speaks under evidence. Her voice lower. Then you become exactly what your enemies already believe you are. That hit. Huh. Not because it was cruel. Because it was true. Dante's hand tightened once on the gun. Then loosened. That was all. But Elena saw it. The choice. The impossible, brutal choice. And for the first time since she met him, she saw Dante Morti do something more powerful than violence. He stepped away from it. He lowered the weapon. Not all at once. But enough. Then he looked at Marco and said in a voice colder than murder. Chain him. Security rushed in immediately. This time no one hesitated. Marco was dragged back, furious now, shouting half-formed accusations and bitter loyalty and fragments of justification as the guards forced him from the room. Lucia's name surfaced twice. A shipping corridor once. Bellini once. In one final sentence before the door shut. You think she's the first woman to destroy a house like this? Then he was gone. Silence remained. Heavy. Aftershock silence. Dante stood with the gun still hanging at his side. Elena watched him breathe once. Then twice. Then he set the weapon down on the desk with absolute precision. Only then did he look at her. And what she saw in his face nearly undid her. Not rage. Not pride. Something far more difficult. Not because he had almost killed Marco. Because he had wanted to. And because she had seen it. That, he said very quietly, was not for you to stop. Elena's throat tightened. Yes, she said, it was. He stared at her. And for one suspended second, something passed between them that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with trust forged under moral pressure. He had almost chosen blood. And she had forced him back toward truth. Not because she controlled him. Because he allowed the truth to matter more than his instincts. That was rarer than kindness. And infinitely more intimate. By dawn, Lucia's world began collapsing. Not publicly yet. But structurally. Dante had her communications mirrored. Her devices isolated. Her travel permissions frozen. Her access to Mateo revoked under the pretense of security stabilization. She noticed, of course. People like Lucia always notice when doors begin closing. But Alina did not expect what happened next. Lucia requested to see her. Not Dante. Not legal counsel. Not Bellini. Elena. The meeting took place in the winter garden just after sunrise. A room of glass and stone and pale citrus trees, beautiful enough to feel almost cruel under the circumstances. Lucia was already there when Alina arrived. Elegant as ever. Composed as ever. Only now the composure had edges. "You're very effective," Lucia said without greeting. Alina remained standing. "You asked to see me?" Lucia smiled faintly. "Straight to utility. I can see why he listens. He listens to truth." Lucia gave a soft, almost pitying laugh. "No," she said, "he listens to what wounds him correctly." That was not an unintelligent answer. And that made Lucia more dangerous than Alina wanted to admit. She was not merely vain. She was observant. A strategist in softer clothing. "You think I wanted this?" Lucia asked. "I think you wanted power." Lucia's expression didn't shift. "Power," she said, "is what women call safety after men have made safety conditional." That line might have worked on someone else. On someone easier to seduce with wounded elegance. But Alina knew the difference between survival and corruption. One protects the vulnerable. The other sacrifices them and calls it necessity. "You endangered a child," Alina said. Lucia's jaw tightened once. "There are things you don't understand." "Then explain them." Lucia looked at her for a long moment. Then, quietly, "Dante Morti was never going to change this empire. He only wanted to refine it, civilize it, make it photograph better. Men like him call that progress." Elena said nothing. Because that part might not have been entirely false. Lucia stepped closer. "You think you're saving him," she said. "You're not. You're making him cleaner, more survivable, more legitimate." Her voice lower. "That is more dangerous than a monster people can recognize." The words landed. Not because Alina believed Lucia, but because the sharpest lies always carry one shard of truth. And before Alina could answer, Lucia said the one thing that chilled her more than the rest. "He knows who your mother was, doesn't he?" Alina went still. Lucia smiled then. Not warmly. Triumphantly. "There it is," she said softly. "So he finally told you enough to keep you close." Alina's pulse sharpened. "What do you know?" Lucia tilted her head. "Enough to understand why you terrify older men." She turned toward the glass, sunlight catching the side of her face. "Your mother didn't just end a war," she said. "She decided who inherited the peace." Alina's breath caught. Lucia looked back over her shoulder. "And that," she said, "is why people still remember her name when they're afraid." Before Alina could say another word, the winter garden doors opened. Dante entered. 2 legal advisors behind him. 1 security officer. And in his hand, the full amended trust packet. Not partial. Not fragmentary. Complete. Lucia saw it immediately. And for the first time since Alina met her. Lucia DeSantis looked afraid. Not dramatic fear. Not shrill panic. The colder kind. The kind that arrives when an intelligent person realizes the architecture they built in secret has just been laid out in daylight. Dante stopped several feet away. His voice was calm. Too calm? We're done. Lucia held his gaze. Then straighten. "Then do it properly," she said. "No tears. No pleading. No collapse." Interesting. That told Alina something important. Lucia had expected many outcomes. This was one of them. Which meant she had not built her plan to survive only through seduction or access. She had built fallback routes. Escape routes. Maybe even allies beyond Marco. And that meant the war was not over yet. Not even close. But one thing had changed irreversibly. Dante had chosen. Not family optics. Not old loyalty. Not blood protection. Truth. And once power chooses truth publicly, the people who built their lives on silence begin to fall apart. The collapse of an empire rarely sounds like an explosion. Usually, it sounds like paper. Folders opening. Contracts sliding across polished tables. Lawyers clearing their throats before saying the sentence that changes a bloodline forever. And no shouting. No spectacle. No shattered crystal. Just truth, documented. That was always more devastating. Alina stood near the windows of the estate's private conference room, hands folded in front of her, shoulders still aching under the sweater but her face composed. Outside, the city looked calm from this height. Too calm, the kind of calm only distance can create. Inside, 3 lawyers sat in silence. Lucia remained elegant even now, one ankle crossed over the other, chin high, as though dignity alone might still negotiate with evidence. Dante sat opposite her. Still. Unreadable. Dangerously quiet. But Alina could feel it now, the change in him. Not softness. Not redemption. Something more difficult. Deliberate restraint? He was no longer reacting. He was choosing. And that made him far more dangerous to guilty people than rage ever had. One of the lawyers slid the amended trust packet forward. Wish you didn't touch it. You're making illegal theater out of family panic, she said. No, Dante replied. I'm correcting an attempted theft. Lucia's eyes moved to Alina then. Jo. Beautiful. Hilt. There she is, she said softly, the moral witness. Alina didn't answer. Lucia smiled faintly. Do you know what happens to empires when women like you enter them? Alina held her gaze. They become accountable, she said. That almost made Lucia laugh. Naive. No, Alina said, expensive. That landed harder. Because it was true. Morality is expensive in corrupt systems. It costs access, convenience, relationships, sometimes survival. That was why so few people practiced it when it mattered. One of the attorneys cleared his throat and began summarizing the evidence formally. The unauthorized trust amendments. The emergency continuity manipulation. The procurement substitutions. The mirrored communication threads between Lucia and Marco. The offshore legal consultant retained under a shell advisory structure tied to succession contingency language. It was not yet a murder case. Not fully. But it was enough to begin criminal exposure. Enough to remove her. Enough to freeze the structures. Enough to stop the machine before it reached the next phase. Lucia listened to the summary without interruption. Then she looked at Dante and asked the question Alina suspected had been waiting behind all the others. Did you ever love me? The room went still. Not because it was romantic. Because it was strategic. People like Lucia often ask emotional questions when factual defeat becomes inevitable. It is one final attempt to force the other person to bleed in public too. Dante did not flinch. I respected what I thought you were, he said. Lucia's face changed. Only slightly. But Alina saw it. That hurt more than hatred would have. Because hatred still acknowledges intimacy. Disappointment withdraws it. Lucia looked at Alina one final time. And then she said the thing that told Alina the war still had one last shape left to reveal. You should ask him, Lucia said, why your mother disappeared after saving his family. The room froze. Dante's jaw hardened instantly. Enough. Lucia stood. No, she said quietly, not enough, not nearly. Her eyes remained on Alina. Do you think powerful men preserve dangerous women out of gratitude? That sentence landed like a blade. Then Lucia turned and left under legal escort, every movement still controlled, every step still graceful, as if composure could survive consequence if she wore it long enough. The door closed behind her. And suddenly the room was too quiet. Alina did not look at Dante immediately. Because she already knew something she had been trying not to know for days. Lucia had lied often. Manipulated constantly. But not every weapon she used was fiction. And the sharpest one she had left was the truth Dante had not yet told her. So Alina waited. One of the lawyers began gathering papers discreetly, clearly sensing they should not be present for what came next. Within a minute, the room emptied. Only Alina and Dante remained. Stillness expanded between them. Finally, Alina asked, What happened to my mother? Dante didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough to tell her this would hurt. He moved to the sideboard and poured water into 2 glasses, then brought one to her without touching her hand when she took it. Respecting space. Still, even now, that mattered. He stood across from her for several seconds before speaking. When I was 19, he said, my father was losing control. Elena said nothing. Not publicly, he continued. Publicly, he was untouchable, but privately the old alliances were fracturing. Ports were being skimmed. Judges were changing loyalties. 3 factions were preparing to tear the city apart over inheritance and expansion. He looked at her. And your mother walked into that war with no title and no army. His voice lower, and made grown men afraid to lie in front of her. Elena's throat tightened. Because yes, that sounded like her mother. Too much like her mother. Dante continued. She was not officially Morty, not family, not employee, not anything anyone could define cleanly. That was why she was so dangerous. He looked toward the city beyond the glass. She understood contracts, language, trade routes, leverage, and men. More importantly, he turned back to Lena. She understood morality in rooms where everyone else had forgotten it. That one struck deep. Not because it was poetic. Because it explained too much. Her mother's silences. Her caution. Her strange refusal to ever seem impressed by wealth or intimidation. Elena swallowed. So what happened? Dante's expression darkened. My father tried to use her. Not surprising. Not yet enough. She exposed him, Dante said, quietly. Precisely. She redirected evidence, forced a restructuring of shipping channels, and prevented a retaliatory massacre that would have killed civilians in the port district. He paused. Then, she humiliated him. There it was. The true unforgivable sin in patriarchal empires. Not disagreement. Not even resistance. Humiliation. A morally grounded woman revealing a powerful man's weakness in front of other powerful men. Elena felt cold all over. And then, Dante's jaw flexed once. He planned to have her erased. The room disappeared around Elena for half a second. Not dramatically. Just enough to make the glass in her hand feel suddenly very far away. She put it down carefully. And you knew? I found out too late. The words came fast now, like he had held them behind his teeth too long. I was young, loyal in all the wrong ways. I thought I was protecting the family by staying inside the machine instead of confronting it. By the time I understood what he intended. He looked at her directly. She was already gone. Elena stared at him. Gone where? We didn't know. The answer hit harder than certainty. Because ambiguity is often crueler than death. Elena's voice came quieter now. She didn't disappear. Dante held her gaze. No. That was the second answer. The real one. Elena felt the shape of it before he said it. She negotiated, Dante said, with someone outside the family. Someone in federal trade enforcement who wanted access to the financial architecture behind the old port war. She traded enough to end the bloodshed. He paused. And enough to buy her escape. Elena's heart was pounding now. She made a deal. Yes. With the government. With survival. That landed. Because of course she